popping in, so but I'll get started. I'm Lora Jorgensen with Texas A&M AgriLife and the Better Living for Texans program. Better Living for Texans is brought to you by the USDA, the Texas Department of Health and Human Services, and by Harris County. So we've got all these great entities funding these programs, and we're teaching nutrition and physical activity, and we even teach some gardening classes. So I also want to just point out our civil rights poster that we have posted in the background. And so let's see, I'll get started. And thanks also to our Family and Community Health Department here at AgriLife for hosting these Wellness Wednesdays and for inviting me to speak. I really appreciate it. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about kitchen safety and avoiding foodborne illness. And I would like to make this as interactive as possible, and that can be somewhat difficult to do on a virtual platform like this. I'm used to teaching this face-to-face, and it's usually a really interesting discussion. So please feel free to unmute your mic and just ask questions or make comments if you have anything that you want to talk about. Go ahead and do that, and I'll be asking some questions throughout the class too. So please feel free to just talk, and let's make this as interactive as possible. So I'm going to start out with a question. Feel free to answer if you feel comfortable. What does it mean to you when I say food poisoning? Does anybody have any thoughts on that? So food poisoning is also known as foodborne illness. We generally get it from food. We've got a really pretty high rate of food poisoning in this country, higher than what you might think. On average, about 1 in 6 of us get food poisoning every year. So that's a pretty high percentage, and we're getting it from things that we are eating. That's why it's called foodborne illness. It comes from foods. And typically it's foods that have not been prepared correctly or have not been stored correctly, or it's from someone who is sick and has handled that food and the bacteria has been put onto that food. So what we're going to talk about today are ways to prevent getting foodborne illness, and especially to prevent it in our own homes, and prevent bringing those bacteria home from the grocery store and making ourselves sick. So we've got lots of tips to give you to try to keep you healthy. So so I already said 1 in 6 Americans gets food poisoning every year. This results in about 128,000 hospitalizations and even about 3,000 deaths every year. There are certain groups of people that are more susceptible. That will be our elderly population and also our very young population, infants, young children, and also anybody that has a chronic disease that might compromise their immune system, or it could be someone on cancer treatment where your immunity is compromised from the treatment, or it could be a pregnant woman whose immunity is just naturally somewhat compromised from the pregnancy. So these groups of people need to be especially careful and really follow good safety practices like getting foodborne illness. The symptoms, you're probably familiar, most of us have had this probably at some time in our life. Symptoms range from very mild to very severe. It depends on the bacteria that you get and the amount of bacteria that you get. So symptoms can be anything from just fever and chills or headaches, all the way up to severe gastrointestinal distress, vomiting, nausea, diarrhea, just could be really, really severe. And like I already mentioned, enough to hospitalize us. So wide range of symptoms. And the symptoms also can occur anywhere from a couple of hours to a week after we eat the food that caused the symptoms. So we sometimes have difficulty in pinning exactly what we ate or when we ate the food, and sometimes we don't even realize that it's food poisoning because these symptoms really mimic the flu. So a lot of times we might just think we have the flu, or we say we picked up a bug somewhere, and it could be food poisoning. So just something to keep in mind. In the United States, we do have a fairly safe food safety system. There are lots of inspections in place. There's lots of regulations on keeping our food safe during when it's harvested, transported, handled. Anyone that handles food has to know these regulations and follow, good safety procedures. However, things do slip through the cracks. And when you think about where our food comes from, foods like meats and produce, these are natural products. And these are foods that are growing out in the environment, out in the open air, subject to things like rain, irrigation water, animals possibly in the fields. So there's naturally occurring bacteria on our foods anyway. And these things can be the problem, or they can be the bacteria could be added as a part of the handling and processing. So lots of steps along the way through our food system where foods get handled, get packaged, get stored, and lots of opportunities for bacteria to be introduced into those foods. Does anybody know the #1 source of food poisoning right now in our country? Which food is responsible for the most food poisonings?
Is it chicken?
Yes, it's chicken. Yeah, good job. Chicken right now is our #1 source of foodborne illness. Chicken has naturally occurring some bacteria that are really dangerous. Salmonella and another one called Campylobacter. Those are probably the 2 most dangerous ones on the chicken. And they can be really hard to kill. So as we'll talk about, chicken needs some special precautions taken when we're handling raw chicken. So good job. Another really high source of food poisoning happens to be one you might not suspect, but it's our greens, our leafy greens. And you might recall in the news, we've had food recalls and food poisonings from things like romaine lettuce or spinach greens. And these are things that have a lot of surface area. The greens, think about where they grow. They grow out in the farm, on a in a field, open air, and then there's lots of handling as they're picked, and then chopped and bagged and brought to us. So lots of opportunity there for food poisoning, especially if they're not stored correctly. So those greens also we need to be pretty careful with, and we'll talk about those too as we go on. So, so I'll start out by where can we start these preventative things to keep our food safe, and it really can start when you're shopping. So when you're at the grocery store, there are things you can do to minimize bringing those bacteria into your home. So one of them is when you're shopping for your fruits and vegetables. I have a little apple model here. It's a plastic apple. And when you're buying your fruits and vegetables, be looking for produce that is undamaged, that doesn't have any holes through the skin, nice, fresh looking, clean, and be selective in the produce that you choose. Good idea to put it into those plastic produce bags or some sort of a bag to keep it separate from other groceries and put it in your grocery cart. If you're buying fruits and vegetables that are already cut, like carrot sticks or cut apples or something like that, make sure that these cut fruits and vegetables are stored in the grocery store in refrigeration. That's really important because once they're cut, bacteria can be introduced into the inside of the fruit or vegetable, and they need to be refrigerated. And so that goes for both at the grocery store and in your own home. Once you cut your fruits and veggies, they should be stored in the refrigerator to prevent the bacterial growth. Okay, so moving on in the grocery store, we go to our meat section. And this is, like we already know, chicken is our #1 source of food poisoning. So we want to be really extra careful with our raw meats. We don't want the juices from the raw meats to be contaminating or getting on any of our other groceries. So we've got some things we can do, and the grocery stores are usually pretty good about putting those plastic bags usually near the meat case. So go ahead and use those, and put your meats in those bags so that they're not dripping on the other groceries that you're purchasing. I have even seen somebody, I thought this was a good idea, take the bag and kind of put it over your hand and use it almost as a glove, and pick up the meat with the bag and then kind of peel the bag over the meat. So you're not touching the meat package at all. It's just entirely in the bag. And once you get your meat, a good idea is to put that on the bottom of the grocery cart. The carts usually have a top tier and a bottom tier. So putting your meats on the bottom will keep any juices from dripping onto your other groceries. Also really nice when the grocery store puts sanitizer by the meat case. Some of the grocery stores will do that. So good idea to use that as well. Are there any questions or comments on any of that? Buying your produce, buying your meats? Anybody have anything they want to comment on?
I like the idea that, this is Pat, I like the idea that I never thought about putting the meat in the bag before. I usually just take it out of the case and put it in my cart.
Okay, okay,
So,
good.
thank you for that tip. I will start doing that.
Sure, you're welcome. Yeah, yeah, it helps. It helps keep, sometimes those packages can be pretty drippy. So it definitely helps. Good. Anybody else have any comments? Okay, so we have our groceries purchased now, and we're going to bring them to our house. So good practice is always to get those refrigerated items into the refrigerator as soon as possible, especially in our summer heat that we have right now, our Texas heat. It's a good idea to try to plan your grocery trips so that you can get your groceries home and in the fridge within about 30 minutes. You really don't want them sitting in your car, which could be very hot, for longer than about 30 minutes. If you do have to do other errands or things like that, it's a good idea to take a cooler or ice chest, freezer bag, something like that, where you can put your cold foods in your car and keep them colder that way until you can get them home. So getting them home quickly and get those things in the refrigerator is a good idea. So once you get your fruits and veggies home and your meats, your fruits and vegetables are going to stay the freshest if you just keep them in those produce bags, the plastic bags that you put your fruits and veggies, your apples and, you know, carrots, celeries, things like that, in the plastic. Put that directly into the refrigerator. Our fruits and veggies that we buy at the grocery store are usually coated in kind of a waxy or an oily substance. And this is a totally food safe substance. It's just a vegetable oil or a wax, and it serves to keep them fresh. It holds in moisture, and they will stay fresher longer if you just put them directly into the refrigerator and then wash them as you use them. So if you want to use apples or carrots, you pull them out and you just wash them as you need them. So proper way of washing. The produce that we buy has bacteria on the outside of it. We know this because people handle the produce in the store. As you're picking through your produce and you're looking for good, you know, undamaged produce, you're touching it, and so is everybody else in the store. So think about it, you know, the bacteria they might have on their hands, and that can be getting on your produce. So very, very important to be washing your produce before you eat it. All we need to do is just be running it under cool water, under the running water of the sink, and rubbing it with your hands. Just cool water, rubbing it all over, making sure you're getting all the surfaces And if you like, you can get little brushes, little soft vegetable, and be just brushing all the surfaces. Okay, I see that we're getting a 10-minute warning notice. So
if we get disconnected, wait about 2 minutes and log back in using the same link. I'll reopen it. I'm not sure why it's doing it again. I set the meeting for 2 hours.
Great. Okay, thanks, Laura.
Like us.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so washing your fruits and veggies. It's also important to be washing the ones that you are not even going to eat the peel, such as our bananas or oranges, things like that, because same thing, they've got bacteria on the outside that you don't want in your kitchen. So go ahead and wash those bananas and oranges and everything. So just that's the safest thing to do, to keep the bacteria out of your kitchen. Real important side note, a lot of people ask what to wash your fruits and veggies with, and some people want to know if something like dish soap is recommended. Dish soap is not a food safe product, so we do not recommend using dish soap for washing your fruits and vegetables. You're not supposed to be eating it. It can actually make you sick if you were to eat the dish soap, so please don't do that. If you really feel the need to use something on your fruits and veggies, just a diluted vinegar solution would be perfect. Vinegar is food safe. It's really good at removing oils, dirts, things like that. So just like half and half vinegar, water in a spray bottle, or something to just dip your fruits and veggies into, that will help to remove that oily covering and really make your fruits and veggies really clean. Okay, any questions on that?
I have a question.
Sure.
Strawberries. I eat and cut up a lot of those, but you know, I do wash them. I put just a little bit of soap. I let them soak, and then I rinse it off, and then I wash them a second time. So you think that's bad?
Well, we just don't recommend using soap. You know, soap is not meant to be eaten, and it could make you sick. It could upset your stomach. Soap probably has some chemicals in it we don't want to be eating. So I would recommend, you know, just rinsing in water or maybe that diluted vinegar solution. One special note about berries is it's best to just wash those right before you use them, or right before you eat them, because berries absorb a lot of water, so they can get mushy. One thing that I would worry about, if they're absorbing a lot of liquid, they might be absorbing some of the soap too. So I think the best thing to do is just give them a couple rinses and nice clear water just right before you're going to eat them.
Okay, thank you.
Helps. Sure,
Okay.
you're welcome.
I had a question. What are the symptoms of food poisoning?
Okay, the symptoms, they can really range from fever and chills and headaches to nausea. It can be slight nausea, it can be severe nausea, it can be vomiting, it could be, you know, diarrhea, light or severe. The range of the symptoms depends on a lot of things. It depends on how your own immunity is and how your body is fighting off the bacteria. It also depends on how much of the bacteria you have consumed. If you just get a very small amount of bacteria, you're probably not going to get as sick as if you consume a lot of bacteria. So that all plays into it. So we don't, there's no hard answer to that as to how you're going to feel, but it depends on a lot of factors. The different bacteria too have different symptoms. Things like E. coli will have a different kind of a symptom than like a Campylobacter or something like that. So you really don't know what it is that's making you sick unless you were to go to the doctor and get like laboratory testing, which they might do if you're that ill and you go to the doctor or the hospital. They probably would run some tests, I imagine, and try to figure out what you have. So that might be how you could find out what you have. Any other questions?
Oh, I wanted to ask, you know, when you have, when you're shopping and everything, I know that they tell you all the time to do all your canned goods and everything. and do your frozen vegetables and your meats and stuff at the end. But a lot of times in the hospital, in the store, all of those things are right there around the perimeter. And if you do all of that, then you're having a lot of bacteria there. When you go around the perimeter, I know it's healthier to go around the perimeter, but in the inside things, you can't spend a whole lot of time in the inside.
That's a good point. When we're shopping for those fresh things, it's probably good practice to get those towards the end so that they're not sitting, in room temperature, unrefrigerated for, very long. So if it's maybe a really hot day, that might be something to think about, is getting those fresh foods closer, and the frozen things too, closer to the end of your trip, and getting those more packaged and canned things first. That would definitely be good practice, yes. Kind of depends how long your entire shopping trip is. I think if you're generally going to be spending a really long time at the store, you might think about it differently than if you're just running in for something quickly. And also how long your drive might be to get those things home. So just good practice is trying to get those things back into refrigeration and freezing as soon as possible.
Thank you.
Sure, you're welcome.
I have one other question. I know we're talking about before you get the food home, but it never dawned on me until a couple of years ago, especially on Sundays, you cook these big meals, and then normally those big meals set out on the stove, but no fire on, and in the kitchen, so that everybody can go and help themselves. And then I was told that you should never let food sit out that long, because if you do, that's when the bacteria sets up.
That's right. So we have kind of a limit for you to follow as far as that goes. From the time your food is cooked to the time when you should get it back into refrigeration, like putting away those leftovers, the maximum time that those things should be sitting out is 2 hours. So if you can time it so that the food's finished cooking, you serve your meal, everybody eats, then things are packaged up, 2 hours is about the max you want anything sitting out at room temperature. Over 2 hours, and those bacteria start to multiply, and that's where you can start to have a problem. And there's an exception to that. If the weather is very hot, or it's 90 degrees and it's very warm in your home, or you're outside for a picnic or something, then we reduce that time to 1 hour. We just say you really want to get those things back into the refrigeration as soon as possible.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Sure, you're welcome. Okay, so let's see. Another really important thing to talk about is sanitizing our surfaces. So when we go to prep our meats and vegetables, we want to make sure that the surfaces we prep on, our counters, our cutting boards, tabletops, things like that, are sanitized, meaning bacteria have been killed on our surfaces that we're working on. We don't want to be introducing bacteria into our food from our cooking surfaces. So a good thing to use is, I've got these flexible mats here. They're like cutting boards, and it's a good idea to have a couple of these in your kitchen and use one for your vegetables and fruits. Get your fruits and veggies prepped first, get them cut up and put away, or on the stove to cook, or put in the refrigerator, wherever they're ultimately going. And then get a separate cutting sheet for your meats, and then do your raw meats and things. That way you are not introducing the juices and things from the meats into